Welcome back to another episode of Miller's Movers. Jam-packed this week because we've had the release of the handicap weights for the Cheltenham Festival. Of course, slightly different at Cheltenham in that the Irish handicapper frames the weights from Ireland. He doesn't just accept Irish marks. We've had to wait for him to give a special set of weights for these races. We're going to go through those in detail. So this week there'll be no handicap movers and shakers, just the handicaps covered from Cheltenham. But first, we'll just have a quick look at the weekend's action. It's just been a source of frustration for me is that Kempton now blends into being preparation races for Cheltenham. We had a number of graded races. I thought they were good contests in their own right, and straight away the talk afterwards was, where will this horse go at Cheltenham? Will they go to Cheltenham? Will they miss Cheltenham? It does start to become a bit tedious in my mind, and you lose the value of graded races away from the Cheltenham Festival. But starting with Rubo in the Pendle, I thought he was really good. The ground had gone against him. The ground went against my selections. I didn't see 10 mil of rain arriving. I thought they might get 2. They got 10. The ground went soft. That did for my selections that I'd made earlier in the week, and I thought it would do for Rubo. He's best on a sound surface, probably best previously up to 2 miles. This was 2 mile 4, a real stamina test because of the soft ground. He wasn't wildly impressive in terms of the winning margin in the performance, but you had to like his attitude. He really battled for this, having perhaps previously been slightly marked down as a flat track bully, winning round flat tracks like Wincanton in fairly small fields where he's been allowed to do his own thing in front. This showed a different side to him. I think it opens up potential opportunities for him going forward. Now they know he stays. He even looked like he might stay a little bit further. So Rubo, I think, will kick on over fences now into the spring. They are going to miss Cheltenham, look towards Aintree, maybe Ayr. I think this is a really talented horse moving forwards, and he's certainly going to make up into a decent chaser. Tripoli Flyer, he won the Dovecot. Again, in really impressive fashion. I thought this was a decent race on paper. Miami Magic in there, Celtic Dino, but Tripoli Flyer showed him a clean pair of heels. His jumping left a little bit to be desired at points, but he came wide down the outside in the home straight, quickly had this race won, despite butchering the second last, got a better jump at the last and pulled right away. It is quite a short turnaround now to go to Cheltenham. Fergal O'Brien, of course, still chasing that first festival winner. He's gone close on a couple of occasions. I think he's going to struggle to resist temptation to go here, though it was concerning to see that this horse bled from the nose, as reported by the veterinary officer. So they aren't going to be able to get him straight back into training. He's going to need a little bit of time. Not really an ideal preparation, despite the fact he won this impressively to go into the Supreme. If he were mine, I think I'd wait. I think I'd look after him. I think I'd almost go the handicap route and try and win the Scottish champion hurdle at Ayr or something, the same as Favour unfortunately did last year, and then kick on and look to the Greatwood next year. But I think, given connections, they probably will look to go to the Cheltenham Festival. And he's got every right to go there on ability. It does look a deep Supreme with the Irish Challenge. I don't think he'll shake up them, but he's certainly the best British 2 mile novice hurdler. The Adonis was for the juveniles, and again, Mondo Man failed to show his true potential, or certainly the potential we think he's got, judging on his flat rating. A good flat horse in France, again pulled far too hard, as he had when behind Lulamba. As a result, his jumping was severely compromised, as was his finishing effort. They're going to have to change something up. I was surprised to see they didn't reach for a hood this time. Surely they will next time. Maybe ride him a little bit more forward. Maybe look to change jockeys. Keelan Quinn is a really good jockey, but I often feel that settling horses isn't his strongest attribute. He's better on a horse that requires stoking along. Maybe they could look at that. They've got Niall Houlihan in the yard. Maybe he might get a go next time, but Mondo Man is failing to show on his promise so far. The race was won by Mambo, number 5. He improved significantly on what he'd shown at Cheltenham on his first start for Ben Pauling, but overall this was a fairly weak affair. They certainly won't be shaking up any of the juvenile contests, either the Triumph or the Fred Winter at the Cheltenham Festival. The big handicap of the day, that went the way of Katati Dory. He certainly benefited from the rain that arrived, turned this into a real stamina test, got a bit outpaced over the first few fences, but then made a big forward move under Charlie Deutsch, who's not averse to taking these races by the scruff of the neck if he feels things aren't being run to suit him. Got into a lovely jumping rhythm, bar the fourth last, and pulled right away. Highland, he was my selection. He didn't really get a great cut of it from Nico de Boinville. His jumping was a little bit moderate in the early stages. That meant he got shuffled back. Nico then seemed quite content to sit and wait and ride a patient race. Did look like he might close into contention on the home with Ben, but then his effort rather petered out. I don't think this is the best version of Heineken. He certainly wouldn't have been suited by the soft ground. And perhaps moving forward, being in amongst the pack and getting buffeted around and not getting a particularly clear passage through this race might well stand him in good stead going forward, whether they were to go to the Ultima at the Cheltenham Festival or indeed go on to the Grand National, which I think is perhaps their first preference. Probably won't do Highland all that much harm to have experienced that, having been a fairly prominent runner over fences so far. So into a bumper edition of looking at the released handicap marks for the Cheltenham Festival. We'll go through them in chronological order, starting with the Ultima, the first handicap on the Tuesday, and this has certainly suffered from the changing rules requiring novices to have 4 runs. These do look like a fairly exposed bunch in the main, certainly not that high class novice coming through that could potentially be a graded horse next year, or certainly as far as I could see it. For me, Search for Glory for Gordon Elliott is the horse here that's of real interest. Off a mark of 147, that gives him a £4 Irish tax, we'll call it for the means of this podcast. He would have been on 143. He's got some really nice chasing form to his name. He won over 2 miles 6 furlongs, a beginner's chase at Galway, 8 lengths from Sama Jest, who's rated 140 and was drawing right away at the end. He then went to the Florida Pearl graded race, 3 miles. I thought he was the best horse in that race, beaten just a short head by Stella Story, his stablemate, also rated 148. And I think given a better ride, he would have won that race. He was just a little bit quiet down over the final 2 fences. I think that gave Stella Story the advantage, but I certainly thought that Search for Glory ran with real credit. He then dropped back in trip for his next 2 starts. That hasn't seen him to such good effect. He was behind Impere Pass in the Forheen novices chase. That was over 2 mile 4 at Limerick. Still ran really well, only beaten around about 4.5 lengths by a very talented performer in his own right. Certainly a stronger stamina test would have suited him, and then the same was true last time. He's now going to step back up in trip onto a galloping track. He didn't show his best form when running in the Albert Bartlett at the festival last year, but I'm happy to put a line through that. Soft ground has been the requirement for him. He's only ever run on soft ground, but I'm wary of saying the horse won't go on better ground when it's only ever run on soft ground. There's no evidence to say he won't go on better ground, so I'm prepared to take my chance with him. He's currently priced up at 28 to 1 with SBK. That seems a really big price for a progressive young horse in a field where he's perhaps racing against slightly more exposed horses than he would in Ultimas of years gone by. The Boodles, the Fred Winter Juvenile Hurdle, not really a race I'm keen to get involved with from an anti-points perspective. I think it's a very difficult handicap to solve at the Cheltenham Festival. There were a few that stood out. First on my list would be Mercia for Willie Mullins. Got a mark of 136. That's a £3 Irish tax. I thought she looked in need of her first run for 200 days on her debut for Willie Mullins. Faded, having been quite keen through the early stages at Leopardstown, but then ran much better last time behind Bacchanalian, just beaten the neck. Bacchanalian since gone on to win a Grade 3 contest. That looked like a decent bit of form, and she did look there that she would appreciate a sound surface, whereas Bacchanalian, strong stayer, certainly thrives on deep conditions. So drying ground will suit Mercia. She's a pacey looking filly by Dr. Dino. Willie Mullins not perhaps got the strength and depth of his juveniles this year, but looks like she's been campaigned towards this race since arriving with him. She's got the advantage as well that she'd raced over hurdles in France, so she only had 2 runs in Ireland. Perhaps makes it a little bit harder for the handicapper to get hold of her. Certainly would have her on my shortlist. Naturally nimble, well, he ran really well for Joseph O'Brien when beating Willie DeHoo on his first start in the country, but I think that was a race that fell apart. That's perhaps given him a slightly inflated handicap mark. He might just be a little bit high in the weights, as could Stencil. He ran well on his only start over course and distance behind East India Doc, who's beaten 10 lengths. I think East India Doc is a very sound horse indeed, but Stencil was well beaten on that occasion. He's got a mark of 135. It doesn't scream to me that he's particularly chucked in here, but he's already got experience of the track. He's got plenty of experience in France as well. He hurdled well. That'll stand him in good stead. He certainly should be on the list. And then Total Look, he would have been on the list and it would have been a real interest, but he's got a lump with a £7 Irish tax. I think that makes things very difficult for him. But Gavin Cromwell will have a good line through his juvenile. He's got Hello Neighbour, who's quite well fancied for the Triumph Hurdle, so he'll certainly be able to get a grasp of just quite how good Total Look is. So the Boodles, not a race I'm keen to get involved with. Those would be the 4 on my shortlist, but I'm sure we'll look at that in more depth on the preview pod with Jess and Tom, and then the daily pods with Tom that we're going to run throughout the week of the Cheltenham Festival. On to the National Hunt Chase now, and of course this is a new look National Hunt Chase, now a novice's handicap, capped at 145 and getting in bang on that mark of 145 is Dufflecoat. That gives him a £1 Irish tax. He was placed second in the Galway plate off a mark of 140, stayed really strongly on that occasion. He's then been campaigned over mixed trips since then. I think he's been laid out for this race. Certainly they've had this race in mind. He does look like a strong stayer. Certainly back in his hurdle days, he's yet to race over a trip as far as this. That could bring about more improvement. Gordon Elliott has a good record at the Cheltenham Festival with his handicappers, and given that this race is now a handicap, certainly Dufflecoat is of interest. Kintara, from much further down the race, just a mark of 125 for the Rowleys. He was second in the per temps last year off a mark of 131. That was on soft ground, stayed really well. Then went to Aintree and ran in the Grade 1 Manifesto Novices hurdle there, over 3 miles. Came down at the last. He was beaten at the time, but he was running very well on that occasion. Was in second when coming down. It wasn't going to win, but it was a decent run all the same. He's not jumped particularly well in 2 chase starts this year at Windsor and at Aintree. But at Windsor last time, he was closing quite well in the closing stages. He made a mistake, then got hampered by a faller who came down at the same fence. That certainly compromised his finishing effort. And I think he's the sort of horse that could well improve for jumping at a slightly slower pace. And indeed, he's clearly got plenty of stamina, so this trip should bring about more improvement. Transmission, he'll be of real interest. I'm hoping he goes towards the Kim Muir for the amateur riders, Kim Muir. So I'll talk about him then. But top of my list for the National Hunt Race would be Haiti Couleurs for Rebecca Curtis. Be really impressed by this horse this season. 2 wins at Aintree and at Cheltenham, both times showing plenty of stamina. And at Cheltenham, you couldn't fail to be impressed by his slick jumping. He never missed a beat under Sean Bowen. His mark of 135 has been protected since then. He had a prep race around Newbury over hurdles. Off this same mark, finished third, again on soft ground, stayed really well in the closing stage over hurdles. His jumping is such an asset. He's undoubtedly going to be a better chaser than he is a hurdler. So given he was competitive off this mark of 135 over hurdles at Newbury last time, I do think he's got outstanding credentials in this new look National Hunt Chase. On to Wednesday now, and the first handicap on the Wednesday is the Coral Cup. Won't be an anti-post bet for me here because many of these horses will have the option of the Coral Cup or the Martin Pipe Novices Hurdle, but I'll give you my shortlist where I'm looking at the moment. Be aware, well, he's been really well spoken about. He's going to feature in plenty of anti-post previews. He's been well spoken about by the scouts, and I'm always slightly wary of horses that trainers are prepared to put forward. It almost seems a little bit too obvious. He's got a mark of 137. He's run really well in 2-mile handicap hurdles, particularly in the Greatwood when finishing to really good effect behind Burdett Road. Does look like he's going to improve for stepping up in trip, but he's only got 1 win from 6 hurdle starts. He was beaten over 2 miles 5 furlongs in a novice, so he's not perhaps thrown in as much as we think. He's not perhaps open to as much improvement going up in trip as we think. I think he's going to be too short in the market because he's going to be a big talking horse. They're the sort of horses I'm keen to avoid. Happily watch him win at what I think will be a shorter price than his form perhaps merits. Bo Zenith, we mentioned him on the podcast a while ago. Myself and TC wasn't declared as a runner in a race where we thought he'd be interesting. Stays on a mark of 137. He has got the Martin Pipe as an option, but he's looked to be crying out for the step up in trip. He was virtually tailed off at the top of the hill on his debut for Nicky Henderson, having switched from Gary Moore after a long time off, but rallied really well to finish second behind Mirabad, who'd had the run of the race and had slipped the field. That certainly suggested he wanted to go up in trip. Didn't run so well next time at Ascot, but I think the lively ground went against him. A little bit of cut in the ground, a mark of 137. Certainly think Bo Zenith has got plenty going for him, particularly in light of his very good juvenile form behind Zenta. She was rated 143 now. He was only beaten a short head by her giving away the mare's allowance at Aintree a good few years ago. Joyeux Machan, now he'd be the horse from the Skelton Yard that would most interest me. He's on a mark of 135. I've dibbed in and out of the Dan Skelton Yard tour. I didn't see this horse mentioned, and that straight away makes him of interest to me because it's the ones they don't mention. What they don't say is what you're looking for here. He was given plenty to do at Ascot last time behind Alta Belly, given quite a patient ride, really close to good effect in the closing stages, having been a real big eye catcher at Wetherby the time before. I think this stiff track going up in trip a little bit further again in this Coral Cup trip will certainly suit him. It's of course not a given that Harry Skelton rides him. Does look like Be Aware seems to be their main string, but the Skeltons have won handicap hurdles at the Cheltenham Festival with their second strings, with second string jockeys before. They've certainly got a good team of jockeys in that yard. It wouldn't be all that much of a negative to my mind if Harry Skelton wasn't on Joya Machan. But of course, if he was the stable selection on the day, that would certainly boost your confidence. Nadawi for Gordon Elliott, off a mark of 140, that's with a £4 Irish tax. He was second in the Galway hurdle over 2 miles, finished really well, kept on for third in the Fred Winter last year off a mark of 134. This is a horse that's got plenty of stamina. It's been tried over quite stamina testing trips on the flat, 2 miles, 2 mile 4. Hasn't won, but certainly has looked to stay all but most of that trip, perhaps weakening in the closing stages on those occasions. But this 2 mile 5 furlong trip should be well in range over hurdles. I think Gordon Elliott has plotted this horse towards this sort of trip over hurdles. So a mark of 140, despite that £4 Irish tax, certainly makes him of interest. But again, he has the Martin Pipe as an option. Pattern Merchant, I mentioned him after the Dublin Racing Festival. I thought he ran with real credit in the 3 mile handicap hurdle there. He's got an offer mark of 134. That's with a £3 Irish tax, but he is also in the Martin Pipe conditionals race, and he's been ridden by a conditional on each of his last 3 starts. That would suggest to me that that might be where he ends up, but he's certainly on the list in the Coral Cup. And then perhaps the most outstanding one is Sandor Cleglan, largely because he receives 0 Irish tax. He stays on his mark of 147. I think that makes him automatically of interest. He's pretty much a graded horse in handicaps here. He's got some very good graded form both over hurdles and over fences. He was placed in Nathaniel Lacey over 2 mile 6. And it might just be that we've all perhaps got this horse wrong. He's looked like a strong stayer who then perhaps doesn't see out the 3 mile trip. I just wonder whether he's got a bit more pace than we give him credit for. Dropping back in trip in a handicap that's going to be run at a fast pace. He has got a good cruising speed. Does seem to stay quite well, largely. And I think this is a sort of race that might just set up for him for Paul Nolan. So of my shortlist at the moment, I think Sandor Clegane would be top of that list, but I'm certainly going to wait till nearer the day when I get a little bit more of an idea as to whether these horses can be heading towards the Coral Cup or the Martin Pipe. The cross country is again a new look cross country race this year, being reverted to a handicap as it is at the November and December meetings. To my mind, that's going to make it a more exciting race. I know not everyone is in agreement with it, and I certainly think some of the changes have diluted the races, but this I think is going to make it a far stronger race. Bustleton, he would be of interest off a mark of 138. He's actually £1 lower in this than he would be if running in a handicap in Ireland. He's had 2 quite nice sighters around the cross-country races in November and December, ridden quite cold out the back, making quite good progress. His stamina would just slightly be a question mark. Certainly on soft ground, I would query whether he'd get home. But if the ground were to go fairly lively, and we are due a dry forecast, and they can't water on the cross-country tracks, so that would, in the event of a dry couple of weeks, ride quicker than the conventional race tracks. I think he would certainly be of interest there. Chemical Energy, off a mark of 143. Again, no Irish tax for this horse. He's been falling down the weights. He ran very well in the National Hunt Chase 2 years ago behind Gaillard de Menil. Now, Gaillard de Menil is a low 150s horse. Chemical Energy was rated 148 at his best. He's now down to 143, and he caught the eye at Punchestown in a cross-country race, given a very quiet ride round. Made some quite nice progress before perhaps getting a little bit tired late on. He's quite a classy sort of horse. He's going to get plenty of weight from a few above him. He would certainly be of interest. Mr. Coffee, well, I've already mentioned him earlier on this year after he ran really well in his first start over cross-country fences, learnt on the go with his jumping, given a quiet ride, finished to quite a good effect, was given a more prominent ride last time out at the December meeting behind Stumptown. Again, ran really well. And I think this horse still made no offences. It would be quite some story if he could shed his maiden tag in the cross-country chase at the Cheltenham Festival, but I've already advised him at a big price. Certainly haven't lost any faith in him at all. Stumptown, well, he's going to be the short price favourite here, isn't he? He's looked revelation since going over cross-country fences. He won very snugly indeed from Mr. Coffee last time, but he's got humped up £8 in the weights now to a mark of 157. This is going to be a deeper race. He's going to come in against a few classy horses here. He might not just be able to swing through the race in a common canter as he did last time. Perhaps he'll have a little bit more to do. He's going to be very popular, but I'm going to try and go against him here and get him beaten. And the horse I'm most keen on at this stage is Gelvin. Off a mark of 154, he was 4th in the Grand National last year off a mark of 155. Ran really well, perhaps just didn't quite see out that 4 mile, 2 furlong trip. This is a little bit shorter. He was second in this 2 years ago. He missed it last year because they went straight to the Grand National. He had a very light preparation for that race. I think he's been laid out for this year. He's been very lightly campaigned. I don't think they believe they can win the Grand National. He doesn't quite stay that trip. this would look the obvious target for him. He went to America, ran on good ground there, ran very well indeed, had a light campaign. If the ground comes up lively in the forecast, which we perhaps shouldn't get too carried away with, is suggesting it is, I think he'll go very close, because his second placed effort 2 years ago came on desperate ground, which certainly wouldn't have suited him, and he was bang there at the finish. So Galvin, off a mark 154. He is an 11-year-old now, but he's a cross-country veteran. I think he's got every chance of upsetting Stumptown in the cross-country chase. The Grand Annual is the 2-mile chase handicap. I've got a couple of ideas on my shortlist here. The first is perhaps going to have you screaming at your screen. It's Harper's Brook, off a mark of 137. He is probably best described as an enigma, but he's an exceptionally talented horse. He won very nicely indeed at Wetherby off a mark of 136. He won pulling a cart. He doesn't do all that much when he gets to the front. He doesn't always find an awful lot for pressure, but a mark of 137 is undoubtedly far inferior to his actual true level of ability. It's the sort of horse I'd be prepared to take a big price on, happy to watch him go through the race. What he does up the hill is anyone's guess, but Harper's Brook, now with the Skeltons, I think he's a really talented horse. Keelan Woods, I think, feels like he's starting to figure him out. It would be no surprise at all to see him go very close in the Grand Annual. Perhaps the most obvious one, though, is My Mate Mozzie, off a mark of 151. That's a £1 Irish tax. He was a very easy winner on his only try over fences at this track in a novice chase. He's run well off a patient ride at the Dublin Racing Festival, 2 mile, 1 furlong last time. That was off a mark of 146. Gavin Cromwell is the rising trainer in the Irish ranks. I don't think it'll be all that long before he overtakes Gordon Elliott into second behind Willie Mullins in the Irish trainers. And I think that My Mate Mozzie might be well mentioned in some stable tours, so just mind what sort of price he is, but he's certainly got to be on your shortlist for the Grand Annual. The Novice Handicap Chase does make a return to the Cheltenham Festival this year. Perhaps we didn't get rid of the right races and it might need to be reviewed again, but I think the return of the Novice Handicap Chase is only a good thing. Answer to Cave, he'd be on the shortlist off a mark of 145 with a £3 Irish tax. He ran really well for fourth in the Martin Pipe last year. That might, though, just be a weaker edition. I think we can sometimes fall into the trap of thinking every Martin Pipe is going to throw up a future Gold Cup winner like Galloping de Champs. I'm not sure last year's edition was all that strong. It was soft ground as well. I think they'd have been desperate to have got a fourth run into Answer to Cave to open up opportunities over fences over 3 miles, but he can come here and only here. He's certainly a talented horse. He was given quite a quiet introduction in his first 2 starts. Then looked like the handbrake came off last time. He won very easily indeed, but he was claimer ridden. He's up a decent hump in the weights now. That last win came off 130, now off 145 with that £3 Irish tax. That's going to make things tough, but we know he likes the track. We know that Terence O'Brien getting ready at this time of year, so that makes him of interest. Nürburgring, this is a horse I'm really interested by. Off a mark of 143 with a £3 Irish tax. That still means he's £7 below his hurdling mark, and I think he was quite a well handicapped horse over hurdles off a mark of 150. He ran really well on his chase debut, jumped very soundly. Ever since then, he's been kept to 2 mile trips, been given quite patient rides. I don't think that's seen to best effect. It's sometimes compromised his jumping. I've got absolutely no doubt that he'll excel going up to this trip over fences. His jumping is of no concern. I think he looks a very well handicapped horse off a mark of 143, and we know that Joseph O'Brien is to be really feared in these handicaps at the Cheltenham Festival. But just under the radar and much further down the weights is Shan Valley Kid. He's off a mark of 129. He got quite a severe Irish tax of £5, but he's still £6 lower than his hurdle mark. He ran really well in the Coral Cup last year, finishing third behind Langadan. That is definitely a strong piece of form. I think that's a stronger piece of form than Answer to Cave managed in the Martin Pipe last year. His chase debut was really quite interesting at Navan. He jumped really poorly over the first few fences, had a really good look at them, went quite high in the air, lost plenty of momentum, but he warmed up through that race under Danny Mullins, I think it was on that occasion, gave him a really educational ride, and he looked like he was going to play a big part turning in. But he then had a slow jump at the fourth from home, weakened from there on in, but he certainly caught my eye. I felt that it was a really experimental ride. He's dropped back in trip since then. That was over 2 mile 4. He's been campaigned at 2 miles since, been finishing down the field, but catching my eye each time. I think stepping back up in this trip at a track we know he likes off a mark of 129. He is going to need a few to come out to actually get a run. Shan Valley Kid would be of real interest in the new Novice Handicap Chase. Over the same course and distance is the Plate Handicap. Colonel Harry, he would perhaps be of interest here for me, off a mark of 145 for Jamie Snowden. That's a very lenient mark compared to some of his best form in novice chases last year. He does, though, need soft ground, so he's certainly a horse that I would want to play nearer the time. He's a sound jumper, he's a strong traveller. He was far too keen through the Hennessy when particularly well fancied this year. That to me suggests that this yard think that he's a well handicapped horse off this mark, so he's certainly be on a shortlist. Fugitive, my own favourite, I think he's got an outstanding chance off a mark of 148. He's a course and distance winner off a mark of 151. He was runner-up in 2023 off a mark of 149. He comes here a pound lower. I thought his preparates in the Denman Chase was really quite eye-catching. He certainly didn't stay the trip. I thought he would. He didn't, but he shaped well at the weights against horses that were far higher rated than him, racing off level weights until his stamina gave way. I really liked how he went through that race under Sean Bowen, jumped really soundly. We know he likes this track. Hopefully Richard Hobson can have him in peak form, and I think Fugitive, even in his advancing years, is certainly a horse to be feared in this. But perhaps most interesting at the moment is Zanahiyr for Gordon Elliott. He's a graded horse in a handicap. Got a mark of 151, just a £1 Irish tax. He'd been running well in graded races. He was fourth in a very good edition of the Turners last year. Just to put that into context, Grey Dawning the winner, now rated 162. Jello in third, rated 166. Zanahiyr lines up here in a handicap off a mark of 150. We know he likes this track. I think they've taken a while to get to grips with what this horse wants. He wants a strong pace, perhaps down in grade. He's perhaps not quite up to graded contests. He's been well campaigned, I think, this year to give him every chance of landing a bid pot at the Cheltenham Festival. The Kim Muir, the 3 mile 2 furlong amateur handicap chase, of course, National Hunt Chase, I should have said, is not for amateurs this year. The Kim Muir is Transmission, is the one horse on my list here. Gets off a mark of 133. Kept on really well behind Katie Couleurs over 3 mile 1 furlong. That was off a mark of 132. And he was a cosy winner prior to that off a mark of 129, when instantly he was ridden by Patrick Mullins. Now, Willie Mullins only has one entry in the Kim Muir. That's Sama Jest. He would go in the colours of JP McManus. So that would look like perhaps being Derek O'Connor's ride. That might well leave Patrick Mullins free for Transmission for Neil Mulholland. I think the fact that he's got good knowledge of this horse is certainly a bonus. I hope they resist the temptation of going to the National Hunt Chase, which I think looks a little bit deeper. This doesn't look all that deep, again, because of the new requirements of minimum runs for novices. There's perhaps not as many unexposed novices in here. Transmission gets in here. I think he's looked like being a better horse over fence than he was over hurdles. Neil Mulholland is a smaller trainer, perhaps in the grand scheme of things, but he's very adept at getting horses ready for the big day. Transmission has really impressed me behind Haiti Couleurs, who I really quite fancy for the National Hunt Chase, and I think a mark of 133 in the Kim Muir makes him of real interest. The County Hurdle, again, is another race that I would want to take a deeper look at and come up with some selections nearer the time, but I'll run you through my shortlist at the moment. Absurd, last year's winner. He won it off a mark of 138 last year, but you have to say he won it in spite of the way the race panned out, and certainly in spite of underfoot conditions. This is a horse that's much better on a sound surface. The ground was desperate the last time. He weaved through under Paul Town and got there in the dying strides. It was a very good ride indeed. Mark of 146, £2 Irish tax. That gives him a little bit more to do, but I certainly wouldn't dismiss him if he were to come here again, although there's been mixed messages about whether he might be kept back for a summer flat campaign. Favour and Fortune, I've mentioned him plenty in the podcast. I thought he ran really well on ground that was softer than ideal last time in the Betfair Hurdle. He won the Scottish Champion Hurdle off this mark of 140 last time. He's yet to really get his preferred conditions, a sound surface and a strongly run race. I think when he does, he'll leave this mark well behind him, and that might well be in this County Hurdle. Tell her the name, again, another Keelan Woods ridden horse, off a mark of 137. He was 6 lengths behind the 147 lump sum in his only start for the John Joe O'Neill yard this year. That was in the fighting fifth. I think that makes this mark of 137 look quite lenient. He's clearly quite difficult to train. Again, he's very ground dependent. He needs a sound surface. And up until the run at Newcastle in the fighting fifth, you would have said that he might have been better going right-handed. But having watched that race back, I certainly think he jumped straight enough at Newcastle. He's an unexposed horse, and if the ground comes up lively, he's certainly one to keep on side. Tunt Servator, again, another horse I mentioned after the Dublin Racing Festival. I thought he shaped really promisingly last time over a trip that he didn't stay. He's a Royal Bond winner over this trip. He's got a good change of gear, but my enthusiasm for him might just be a little bit tempered now. He's got a £4 Irish tax. That bumps him up to a mark of 145. Whether he's perhaps got that in hand, I'm not so sure. But Willie Mullins in the handicap hurdles, certainly the county hurdle, you've really got to give real consideration to, as have you with Dan Skelton. He's won 4 of the last 10. He's the only trainer really that's been able to challenge Willie Mullins in this race. He's going to be represented by Valgrand. I don't think we've seen this horse to best effect since his run behind Potter's Charm, where I think they established that he wasn't a graded novice, didn't stay the extended trip on that occasion. They've sort of given him much quieter rides since then. He's normally ridden quite prominently. And they've got his mark down from a mark of 140 down to 134. I think that's a good bit of campaigning to get this horse prepared for spring festivals. Valgrand, I think, will be ridden far more prominently in the county hurdle. Dan Skelton, Harry Skelton have got a good record in this race. And I think off a mark of 134, there's plenty of room to manoeuvre with that mark. And then finally, the closing handicap is the Martin Pipe. Again, not a race I think you can get involved with from an anti-post perspective, because you'll have some horses running here or running in the Coral Cup. So there's a few that I've already mentioned. Beau Zenith and Nadawi, they would certainly be of interest wherever they went. No Ordinary Joe, he'd be interesting off a mark of 138. He was a real eye-catcher at Warwick last time, when interestingly he was ridden by Callum Pritchard, who wouldn't necessarily have a link to the Nicky Henderson yard. I wonder whether that was a sort of getting to know you, getting to like you sort of ride, given a bit of a racecourse experience on No Ordinary Joe. He ran fairly moderately in this race last year, went 7th, but you have to caveat that by saying that Nicky Henderson had very few runners, and those that did run ran poorly. But the year before, he was second off a mark of 139. That was a very good edition of this race. I think No Ordinary Joe certainly is of interest. And then one other, much further down the weights and by no means guaranteed to get a run, is Bleckensop for Henry Daly. He'll be ridden by Hugh Nugent, who's got a family connection to the yard. Hugh is a conditional jockey, so though Bleckensop has got an entry in the Coral and the Martin Pipe, I think he's more likely to come here. He had really good form 2 years ago. He was a winner off a mark of 123, a very ready winner indeed. He went up £8 for that run to a mark of 131. Been given some quite stiff tasks since then in a career that's been interrupted by injury. He had a prep race to get him ready for this. I think if he steps forward for that, Bleckensop certainly wouldn't be underestimated. And Henry Daly has gone close on a couple of occasions in Cheltenham Festival handicaps. So those are my early looks at the Cheltenham Festival handicaps. I'll try and finesse these ideas down now over the next couple of weeks on the podcast with Jess and with Tom. At this stage, I think my 2 biggest fancy would be Search for Glory in the Ultima. I think he's open to plenty of improvement as a progressive young horse. And the older boy, Galvin, in the cross-country chase. I think he can give Stumptown plenty to do, particularly if the ground were to ride on the lively side. Search for Glory currently 28-1 for the Ultima with SBK. Galvin is 11-2 for the cross-country chase with SBK, but the traders said we can have 200-1, so if you want to avail yourself of the 200-1 double for Search for Glory for the Ultima, Galvin for the cross-country chase, follow the link in the video description below. Maximum stakes do apply. Please bet responsibly and read the T's and C's. That's it for another episode of Miller's Movers. I'll be back same time next week. Also next week, we'll have the large Cheltenham Festival preview pod, SBK preview pod with myself, Jess and Tom. So make sure to tune in for that. Click subscribe to the link if you haven't already so you don't miss any SBK content coming up over the next few weeks of the Cheltenham Festival.